on it on Sunday. It's hard to explain a parable like this on a Sunday morning. I'm preaching the section after it for Mother's Day. There's nothing like a dishonest manager for Mother's Day. I think that's not exactly the best foot forward. So where we are here is then Jesus said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought him that this man was squandering his property. This is a word that we've just heard, right? Who was squandering? The prodigal son, the younger son, not the older son, not the older son. Who identifies with the younger son in here? Who identifies with the older? Okay, I've always been there. I've always been faithful. And so you do have a hint that there must be something important about this idea that something has been entrusted to you and you wasted it. The word prodigal means wasteful. So the prodigal son, meaning the wasteful son. I told some folks that I once got a letter from someone in the church complaining about someone using the word extravagant to refer to God. Okay, it had been a prayer, and it wasn't my prayer, but I got the letter. And the letter was like, how dare one of your clergy use the word extravagant in a prayer to describe God? Because extravagant means wasteful, and God is not wasteful. And I just don't think I can come to a church where the clergy think God is extravagant. I love the word extravagant. For me, extravagant, it literally means extra vagrant, to wander beyond that which is necessary. And that is the kind of God I think we have, that wanders beyond that which is necessary. Well, maybe you'd fight back and say, God doesn't wander. God knows where God's going. There's no wandering about it. But the idea that God will go to great lengths to try and reach us, I think, is a beautiful thing. So I'm okay with an extravagant God. But there's this sense of the people in these stories being given a great gift and wasting it. Last week, one of the things I mentioned to the folks that were sitting around me is that part of this older brother, younger brother story, you can see him avoiding the unjust steward, right? The shrewd manager. Part of that story is that Israel had always done all the things according to the law. So Israel is, in a sense, the older brother in the story, and the Gentiles are the younger brother that come along, these Johnny-come-latelys that don't have to be circumcised. Come on, if you're going to be a real Jew, you need to get circumcised, right, Luis? Okay, I mean, this is something this is something that had to be important. And you got to imagine the resentment that's come along. If I had to go through this and I had to obey the law and you don't have to do this doesn't seem fair. So the rich man, and then we have other stories about rich men here. A lot of this is about how you use your possessions. We've been talking about who's invited to the table, and during that who's invited to the table, you have this grumbling of the Pharisees sort of below the surface and sometimes above the surface. But this is about how we use what's been entrusted to us. So the rich man summoned him, his manager, and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer." And then we move on. Then the manager said to himself, "What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do so that when I'm dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes." Strange yet? It's a difficult one. A lot of times we use an interpretive method called allegory. This means this, this means this, this means this. A little harder with this parable. Any questions so far? Yeah, from trying to get more deeply into this. Well, I'm going to let you discuss among yourselves. You can talk online there for a minute. Tell somebody next to you about the best boss you ever had. What made them the best boss? Jerry, you want to talk with those folks there online?
Yeah. Who's online here?
Yeah. Bill?
Hello, Will?
Yeah, Bill.
Yeah. Hey, Bill.
How you doing? Yeah,
I'm all right. How about you?
good, good.
Who's the best boss you ever had?
One that was not a micromanager who kind of made sure that he had good people working for him and let them do the job without looking over their shoulders, questioning every decision they made.
Anybody else online?
Gonna have to agree with Bill on that one. My best boss ever was a guy who basically said, look, this is what you got to do, get it done. The ways I can help you is to remove the obstacles from your way. I want you to come to me if you have problems or if you need anything. And then he let me take care of the task at hand. And I thought he was great.
I had one that I worked, Rankin Smith, who I worked for 32 years, or he and his family, and they just let you do your thing. And they supported you, and and I think Mr. Smith called me twice in 32 years about something very trivial, and but always supported you.
Accountability.
Anyone else?
Sure, weighing in, I agree. One of the best was the one that, said, hey, I got your back, and he really did, and would just, let you get on with it. And so that was great.
Yeah, I agree with the same.
You have to have a lot of trust too.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. I've been listening to the group online. They said basically, I'm echoing, sorry. One of the things that they talked about was how their best bosses were not micromanagers. Their best bosses had their back and helped them to get things done, provided resources, told them what the job was and let them do it. Other things about a great boss? What's that? What do I need to do?
Just repeat it when they say it.
Oh, just repeat it when someone says it. Sorry. A great boss has a short memory. Yeah. Be a goldfish. They get mad at you, but 10 minutes later, it's out of their system. They said it and they let it go. They don't continue to harp on the same thing. Give credit and take blame. Very good. All right, we're going to go to the other side now. Tell us about the worst boss you've ever had.
Oh my God. Lying, cheating.
How about it?
Well, I once had a boss that actually encouraged me to go work for myself. She was so bad. Not only did she not understand what needed to be done, she wanted to micromanage everything that I was trying to do and didn't have a clue as to what needed to be done. I mean, it was absolutely miserable. And she alone convinced me that I needed to pursue a career on my own. And I started Glassman Consulting Services as a result of her management.
Sounds like she had great insight. She put you on a great career path.
I would agree with Armand. I think that one of the very worst boss I had was one that did not have a clue, had been brought in the position for a political reason, had been brought in and appointed the head of a group that had no idea what the heck we did, absolutely no idea, and like took us off on wild goose chase. Like, I think we got to pursue this, and that's the craziest thing we've ever heard. That's and didn't care. That was okay. Well, that was the new thing, so we go off in that direction for a while, and then 2-3 months later, oh yeah, we're not pursuing that anymore because we've got a new mission, and it was pretty challenging. And then again, would try to do the micromanaging thing because they didn't understand what was going on. So they decided the way that they would learn would be to micromanage everybody and question every single thing you did, and try to justify that so they could learn. And that was not great.
Yeah, I think the worst boss I ever had was one who did not believe in servant leadership. Instead of trying to do their best to make sure that the people working under them were as productive as possible and supported them, they kind of served upper management and made sure that they would that whatever upper management had demanded, that they just sent the orders down to the people under them, and didn't really care much how they got the work done. But just and just would not provide any help. Would just send marching orders down. And would refuse
one of the
to.
things that's interesting is how much louder you got talking about worst bosses than you did when you were talking about best bosses. Best bosses is a little bit calmer. Worst bosses, that just comes right out of you. Armand's is my favorite. He had a boss who basically told him to go work on his own, and one of the other fellows there said, or at least she made him want to go work on his own, and the answer online was this woman had great insight into him. So I thought that was great. Other things about a worst boss: they question everything you do. Insensitive. Okay, insensitive. I also heard they're not servant leaders. They're not willing to. They push work down, but they're not willing to get in alongside you and do the work when there's pressure or time crunch and things like that. Anything else? You guys certainly had things to say.
Dale would say it's kind of our judgment or our critique. I mean, they got there because they were doing something right.
Oh, that's interesting insight. Dale said that they got to that position because they were doing something right. Sometimes a worse boss is based on our perspective, perhaps not totally, that they're just not totally suited. That's a good insight. Thank you. The word squander appears in the Bible, as from where I can find, 3 or 4 times. And like 3 of them are here in Luke and 1 is in Proverbs. And I never made the connection before until doing this particular study. There's a weird thing that happens in the story of the prodigal son, because the prodigal son goes and wastes all his money in desolate living or riotous living, depending on the translation. And then when the older brother gets a hold of it, do you remember what the older brother says? Spend it all on prostitutes, right? I mean, it's like a huge leap. It's like, I went and wasted money and I don't know how. And the brother comes and he wasted all on prostitutes. I wonder if he's quoting this proverb. So Proverbs 29:3 says, a child who loves wisdom makes a parent glad. And I'm the older brother. I'm the child who loves wisdom. But to keep company with prostitutes, like my younger brother, as to squander one's substance. I just never saw that connection, but that's really where the word comes from. And he would have been immersed in scripture. And then you get this, a few days later, the younger son gathered all he had. He traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolate living. It's just not a word that shows up very much, except for here in Luke, and there in that proverb. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, this manager asked the first, how much money do you owe my master? How much money do you owe my master? He answered, 100 jugs of oil, of olive oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down, and make it 50. Give yourself a discount. It is interesting accounting. Okay. The Lord's accounting is different than our accounting, I assure you. Then he asked another, and how much do you owe? And he replied, 100 containers of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and make it 80. Got it? And so his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Where is Jesus going with this? Because he had acted shrewdly, for the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of the light. Got it? And I tell you, friends, make friends for yourselves by the means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. This is clear, isn't it? Make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest gain, so that when that gain is gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes. I know this is difficult stuff. This is why I think it was Walter Rauschenbusch who basically said, this is the enemy of all good biblical exegesis. This parable is highly problematic because it's very difficult to understand. You have a different translation there, Wayne? You have an explanation? What Wayne Hill says NIV. I'm in the new RSV. So let's see what Wayne's got. Okay, so it says, make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth. So when your worldly wealth is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Okay, now I had to go to the Message because that's always where I go when it gets messy. I go to the Message. Eugene Peterson was a biblical scholar, and there's great videos of him getting to know Bono. It's really some great stuff online if you're interested. But Eugene Peterson rewrote the Bible to be, it's a paraphrase. It's not a translation, but he paraphrased the Bible to make it easier to understand. So here we go with this. See if this helps us. Now here's the surprise. The master praised the crooked manager. And why? Because he knew how to look after himself. Friends, you need to learn to look after yourselves. Is that the point of this parable? You know? And why? Because he knew how to look after himself. Streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. Okay? So you should learn from those who are streetwise. They're on the constant alert, looking for angles, surviving by their wits. And so the children of the light, you know, we're supposed to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. Jesus speaks about in other places. So I want you to be smart in the same way, but for what is right. I want you to use all your God-given talent and use your mind to be able to help more people connect with Jesus, to foster good news in the world. And I want you to be as smart with the stuff that you're doing as perhaps the people on the street peddling whatever they might be peddling. I want you to be smart in the same way, but for what is right, using every adversity to stimulate you to creative survival. That's a great line. Using every adversity to stimulate you to creative survival, to concentrate your attention on the bare essentials, so you'll really live, and not just complacently get by on your good behavior. So some ideas about interpreting this. These are some of the things. Some people said, you should use sharp financial acumen to get us out of difficulty. You should use the talent that you have, sharpen your pencil to be able to get us out of difficulty. Another explanation that has been posited over the years is the master was charging illegal interest. Jews were not supposed to lend to other Jews with interest. And in what he had done is he was doing something that you shouldn't do under Jewish law, and his manager was making that happen. So what the manager did was I'm cutting out the interest payments because those are illegal anyway. And his boss couldn't say anything about it because he was charging it illegally. Anybody like that explanation? It doesn't say anything about that in the story, but that is one understanding that the rich man was in a double bind because he had a manager that was not doing the right thing, but it's because he was implementing the master's bidding of not doing the right thing. But so often, who is the manager in these stories? Who is the owner in these stories? Often when you look at the stories, the owner is God, and the master is, implementing it. The manager is Israel, the people of God, the children of the light. So, if the master is God and the steward is Israel, how do you deal with this? Is he telling Israel to be smarter in the way that they deal with people, to use, shrewd business acumen to be able to deal with this? And, Israel often in these parables is God's property manager and is supposed to be the light of the world. And so, how do you interpret a passage like this? So I appealed to N.T. Wright. It's somebody that Matt has introduced me to. I knew of him, but had not really connected with his work. And N.T. Wright says things like this. He says, the Pharisees wanted to draw the rules just keep going. Next slide. What does this mean? The Pharisees wanted to draw the rules even tighter to make Israel even more holy, which seemed to exclude the people Jesus was reaching out to. And so it wasn't about becoming more holy. It was about finding creative ways to reach more people, using all that you have to make friends. And so using all that you have to make friends, to make connections so that they might be connected to you through God. But does the means justify the ends? Does the end justify the means? And then N.T. Wright says it this way: throw caution to the wind. Forget the extra bits of the law the Pharisees have heaped up and make friends as and where you can. Still doesn't feel totally satisfying to me about what this parable means. And so we go on. N.T. Wright explains, instead of hoarding money and land, Jesus' advice was to use it. He doesn't want us to sit tight on extra regulations which we impose on one another, which are over and above the gospel itself. The church passes through turbulent times and frequently needs to reassess what matters and what it doesn't, and what doesn't. And I think that's really interesting for us right now. I think that's what we're having to deal with as a church, is what is essential as a church? What makes us a church and what doesn't make us a church? What are some of the things, the regulations and rules that are heaped on over and above what it actually says in the gospel that try and keep people from really experiencing new life and possibility? So I think that's an interesting interpretation. I'm still wrestling with this parable. And I guess that's what a good parable does. It's like a movie with a surprise ending. You're not ready for it. We have it here in print. And so it doesn't necessarily seem to have the same impact. And the people of Jesus' day would probably be rooting for the people who are getting the discount. They would not be identifying with the manager. The people that Jesus is telling this story to, most of them are not identifying with the people that were rich and had wealth. Most of them were not identifying with the person who even was the manager. They were the ones who owed. They were the people who owed a great debt. And so perhaps one of the pieces of this story that we don't feel as much as they did was they were just in awe of a manager who would forgive debt. And so my debts are forgiven. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who, forgive us our debtors, forgive us our trespasses in some translations. So it could be that where we sit has an impact on how we understand the story. You know, we always ask the question, where do you fit into this story? Are you the rich man who's entrusted what has been given to you to other people to manage? Anybody have a money manager? Anybody a money manager, right? Maybe we think of ourselves as the rich man who has entrusted their wealth to someone else. We don't often perhaps think of ourselves as the one who's borrowed and can't pay it back. And that really is what happened in those days. When you were charging interest, you weren't allowed to charge interest. So they used commodities to kind of get around it. So I would give you some wheat and you would owe me even more wheat back when it came in. And it got to be the point like predatory lending today, where you just couldn't keep up with the interest. And the interest just was heavier and heavier and heavier. And so many poor people had so much burden of interest that they didn't know how to get out of it. And there may be a glimmer of hope in this story for them. Is that a way to interpret it? What's that? Student loans. Yeah. Yeah. So this is the passage I'm preaching on Sunday, because I'm going to let y'all live with the parable this week. Whoever is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. It's a little easier to understand, isn't it? This is, Jesus has told this parable, and then he gives this direct teaching. Whoever is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. One of my preaching professors, Dr. Craddock, tells the story about getting in line behind a guy at the airport. And he said, they kind of walked down the concourse together. And the first thing that he did was they were in line to get, like a Panera place. And he got his cup of coffee, and all the little butter pats were 5 cents. And the guy took the butter pats and put them under his cup so that they wouldn't see it at the register. And he thought, here's this guy stealing 10 cents. And so he followed him along, and then the guy slipped a paper into his bag while he was at the newsstand. And there were just all these little things. And I think that when people, I don't ever think people intend to defraud I think most people don't intend to defraud on a big scale. They do something small, and they don't get caught, or there are no repercussions. And then they do something a little bigger, and it just kind of snowballs for them. They didn't mean to embezzle, but it just kind of got out of control. That first dollar became $50. They didn't mean to have an affair. They just started a conversation with her, and things just snowballed. I don't think people, for the most part, intend large doses of evil, but I think that if you're not faithful in small things, they can start to snowball. Whoever's faithful, I probably won't preach it that way for Mother's Day. I'm just saying. But whoever is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. It sounds like something my mom would tell me. And whoever is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful with dishonest wealth or with worldly wealth, who will entrust you with the true riches of eternal life? Who will if you can't have integrity in the little things, and the little things are a real test of integrity. And how are you tested by your integrity with the little things? And if you've not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? And it ends like this. No slave can serve two masters, for either a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth. So I'm going to, and then there's a whole nother section here about the law and the kingdom of God. But let's end with some questions. I've already probably taken too much time for you to be able to answer questions. But here are your questions. Have you ever squandered something that's been entrusted to you? Have you ever squandered something that's been entrusted to you? When have you been called to give an account? Why are the people under your care no better, is what Wesley asked us to say as preachers. He would say to his young preachers, why are the people under your care no better? No one's ever asked me that about y'all, but that was one of Wesley's questions to his preachers. The third one is what really matters in the church and what does not. What is essential for us as a church and what is not essential? Our book of discipline has some things that says are essential, and we have some other things that are not essential. So what are the essentials that we need to be in unity about, and what are some things that are not essential? And N.T. Wright asks this question: how might we learn to think unconventionally, like the dishonest steward, to be prepared to make new friends across barriers, to throw caution to the wind and discover again in the true fellowship of the gospel a home that will last? And finally, when have you felt torn in life between two competing masters? Yes. Question.
Wondering, going back to the phrase,
Yes. That is how some have interpreted this passage, that make friends for yourselves. It's almost, you can never, in email, you don't know people's tone, right? So you do an email? Okay.
Exactly the way I read it.
Exactly the way, yes. Brian says exactly the way he read it is the tone that someone meant in their email. But you don't know tone in email. And one of the things with having this as a written record, we don't know that Jesus doesn't say this sarcastically. Well, friends, make friends for yourself out of dishonest wealth, so that when you do that, you may be welcomed into hell along with others who do that. Pat is offering that as perhaps an explanation. But that is certainly one of the explanations that people have given, that if you're going to make friends by dishonest wealth, you better trust in that, because that's where you're going to live for eternity. Wasn't that fun today? Well, be faithful in little so that you can be faithful in much. Practice daily what it means for you to be faithful in little things. And perhaps over the course of your life, you'll be able to look back and see a long string of faithfulness. Discuss among yourselves. Thanks for listening this morning. Continue to wrestle with this incomprehensible parable.